Welcome, everybody. My name is Lynne and Azarchi, and I'm director of the Kids Bridge Tolerance Center. And today is my inaugural show, Empathy in Action. So I wrote a book about empathy. It's called The Empathy Advantage. But why we're here today and what I want to explore in our community, who are those people who, through a lens of empathy, are acting? Activists, people who care about other people. So let's get to know some of those people, starting with Cecilia Birge. Yes, she Birge. Cecilia She Birge. So thanks for coming to get to talk about what is so important. So I've been obsessed with empathy, I would say, for the past 15 years, and I think we could have a kinder, more peaceful society if people walked in other people's shoes. And you've done marvelous things in our community as an educator, assistant principal, vice principal, or assistant principal at Princeton High School. So thank you for your service there. And we'll talk in a minute about what propelled you to take action and be an activist for our community. So can you share with me, what is it like? I just, again, always want to start with the lens of empathy. What is it like today to be a Japanese child, a Chinese adult, with this whole AAPI anti-hate rising? What, in your heart, what is that like?
Thank you, Lynn. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. You know, I've been a longtime admirer of yours and your organization and the work that you've done, especially those focused on empathy. It's such a loaded word and it's such an important word. And that when that word is applied to different groups of people in our society, the impact is very different. So, so back to your question about what it is like to be an AAPI kid. It depends on which layer of people that you're looking at, because very often when we look at AAPI community, especially when we drop the I, when we only look at Asian Americans, there's this oversimplified idea that Asians are just all of these overachievers, overeducated, perhaps quite wealthy group of people. Stereotypes, model minorities, and in many ways, we expect them to be white. We think we're treating them as white people because that's when we don't see race, we don't see racism, we become colorblind. But the reality is that even for this group of people, they're very privileged financially, but their feelings is that they are not white, and the reality is that they're not treated white. So that goes into the systemic racism in our society. And the other side, you know, as we know, the Olympics just happened. There's all these spotlights on Suni Lee and other Asian Americans who come from who are Hmong Americans, some of them were Filipino Americans. They have a very different immigration past, and their parents' home country have a very different kind of history. Very often they came from imperialistic or colonized, formerly colonized land. And they have a very different experience, racial experience here in America. So the diversity of the community makes it really challenging. But what we all have these days in common is the sense of physical fear. And that's what the pandemic has exposed, has put under the spotlight. Like I said, everybody just assumed we are as safe as the whites. And now we found out we're not. We're actually feeling just the same as a lot of the black folks do, fearing for their physical, sense of safety every single day. Just even daily life kind of chores, going to town, going to New York City, going to Philadelphia. Is that safe enough? Is the first question that comes to our mind. So, and that when you talk about in a child's mind, so you can imagine how are we shaping that young mind with this kind of fear in place, and that itself is really scary.
It feels so sad to me for people afraid to leave the house. I know after George Floyd, talking with a lot of African American black parents, sons and daughters were afraid to leave the house because of the reaction. So what I want people watching the show is to walk in the shoes of, you know, any child or any adult that is afraid to leave the house and is afraid of incoming bias, prejudice. There were incidents, and you can probably tell me better than I know, in Seattle or New York, where Asian adults are hit and struck and fall to the ground. And these visuals stay, I think, with all of us. So it's important, I think, people to walk in the shoes of fear.
Right. It's so traumatizing. I was invited to be a panelist by one of the professors at Rutgers to talk about AAPI hate. And in our prep work for preparing for the slides, we had to take down some of the images because it's so disturbing, even to adults. There was a seminar to adults.
Trauma.
It's right. So we, you know, in a safe environment like more or less in Princeton, we don't see what we don't see. When we don't see, we assume everything is right. But I think that's what we all need to be keeping in mind, that you know, what we don't see very often is the most disturbing thing. And how can we make this place, our community, a safe place for all, especially all children, is really, really important.
It is so important, because how can kids advantage themselves if they don't have that self-compassion and that confidence, because that's the platform, as you know, as an educator, upon which children can reach, you know, academic achievement and such. So Kidsbridge is looking to do some more, because of COVID, maybe webinars in anti-Asian hate for children, because this is what Kidsbridge does. And I was looking back at the history of Asian American discrimination in this country, and you know, I'm not a young person, and I learned so much. I mean, it's so sad, starting with you know, a lot of the laws and the boycotts, and then just something symbolic. I saw the picture of the two railroads coming together, the Intercontinental, and they're all white people. There's no Asian people, and you know that the Asian people did a lot of the work. So it'd be nice if we had more opportunities to open our children to learn the true history of this country and the real history of bias and discrimination, not to make anyone feel bad, because I know that there's a pushback, but just to learn the true history of this country, to own it, and to be activists to make it better.
Right, exactly. I totally agree. By the way, talking about that picture, you know that was a staged picture.
Right.
They removed all the Chinese workers and put in white people in there to stage it. But again, who is telling the story?
Exactly.
And whose story is it?
Exactly.
Right? So when we talk about empathy, like you said, it's really getting about to be the truth. It's not to say who is better or worse. This is not an Olympic race.
And not a blame game either. That doesn't accomplish anything.
Exactly.
But I wish more people would know that we can share the true history. No one is perfect, no family, no community is perfectly, and certainly not our country, but our children need to learn this.
Right. And our kids learn that. I think adults or kids are different. The approaches should be different. You know, we educators say different pedagogies as well. Kids is about empathy building, right? So it's about building that capacity to appreciate differences, to accept differences. For adults, I think it's about self-reflection, self-reflexivity, academically speaking. It's not about, if I were a white person, it's not about if I talk about racism or white supremacy. I'm not saying that if I'm a white person, then I'm guilty of it. Part of that, yes, we all contribute to the systemic racism, whatever color that we come from.
Yes.
But we give our each history, we each bear a different share of burden to make sure that our system can be as fair and equitable as possible. And I think that's where sometimes people feel they are being imposed an unnecessary share of that commitment to social justice, but it's not. A commitment has to come from yourself, and that self-built commitment is, or self-recognized commitment is built by empathy, by self-reflection, you know, by the kindness in our heart, and that's what we want to do from kids, you know, little kids onwards.
So that really leads to my next question. So a lot of this is going on in the schools, but there are a lot of parents listening and caregivers. So springing from this, what can parents do in their home in terms of not relying on the school totally? Let's do a little bit more at home. of course, on the foundation of empathy, how can we help young children, middle schoolers, high schoolers, even learn more about all anti-bias, maybe specifically anti-Asian, or how about Asian accomplishments in this country? What can parents, caregivers do in the home better?
So I'll start with high school since that's my specialty. In Princeton, we have pushed out a curriculum called racial literacy. It's been quite a number of years. I think it's the 5th year. And starting from this year's rising 9th graders, that course has become a graduation requirement. And as well as right now, it's all requirements for all sports and after school club leadership has to take that course. My second daughter took that course, and I have to say, my family is a fairly typical Princeton family. We expect our kids to do well in school, to be happy, to be confident, to be athletically and academically, achieving. But we never really thought about our kids should be achieving as well in the sense of equity and social justice or racial literacy. Racial literacy was not even part of the vocabulary. So
until recently. Right,
exactly. So thanks to two phenomenal teachers, Dr. Barnes Johnson and Ms. Patty Manhart, one white teacher, one black teacher, chemistry teacher actually, got together, but she has a PhD in sociology. So they got together, they created this curriculum, they offered it, my second daughter took it. Throughout, it's a semester-long course. Throughout that semester, she transformed our dinner table conversation. So she brought these topics home.
Wow.
It's not your traditional high school or AP courses where you learn, you take a test.
Right.
It's about reflection, reading, discussion, and coming up with your own inquiries.
Wonderful.
So I think
you're not studying for the test.
Right.
Fabulous.
Right. And you're reflecting on your experience and other people's experiences so that each student's angle is different and they come together, they learn from each other.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. So I learned so much. It has transformed my thinking as well.
Very interesting.
From that experience, I would say middle school, high school parents at home, listening is probably the most important. Listen to our kids. They are all little Marxist and idealistic.
Right.
There's a reason for that. We were like that when we were young, right? So if you do that, I think that helps build the parent and child relationship as well. So it really benefits everybody, and they bring your perspective back into the classrooms.
Right.
So
good things bouncing back and forth, classroom to family. Yeah.
And that's how we progress as a society.
Right. And active listening, I have that in my book, active listening, and I learned there's many different systems of active listening, but basically, like we are now here, face-to-face, eye contact, and then to tell parents, put their phones down, meal time, put the phones down, take the phones away, not so late, so that we're with COVID so entrenched with the media that we go back to conversations. I've heard from teachers, and you can weigh in on this, that they say some students don't know how to have conversations, and there's a lot from COVID, being isolated, a lot of anxiety and stress. So we really need to build these interpersonal skills back again. And of course, again, empathy, that, walk in the shoes of a child who's been isolated, alone, not invited to the party, kids anxious to go back to school in September. So we have a lot of caring and concern, I think, from the heart. It's just open it up and do it, right?
Right, exactly. And parents should model that, right? And it doesn't really matter what you do. In your case, your example is about COVID or dinner table conversation or classroom discussion. You're always talking about empathy. It's always about who is included and who is not.
Right, and belonging is so important
who is
too.
Talking, who's not talking, and why. So, and hearing the disagreements, but finding the common ground. And that's how you build empathy and understanding. I don't have to always agree with you, but I respect the perspectives you carry with you. So that's, I think that's really important to be taught at a very young age. We don't, kids don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm 15, I have empathy, right? It's from very, very young age.
One of the things Kidsbridge is so proud is our preschool programs. And then again, because of the tragic deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, et cetera, that we can now be bolder in talking about race, including anti-Asian hate, but talking about that children do notice color, they do notice differences, and it's just so much easier to have these conversations when the kids are in preschool. And Kidsbridge just did a preschool program actually at the Princeton Y, which was very effective, so that kids, when they're young, they're just more comfortable, and then you continue the conversation and such. So just this foundation of anti-bias for all the kids, for different hair and different skin color and different clothes and different accents and different foods. If we could just start these conversations younger, that we hope in 10 or 15 years the children are going to be more comfortable and we can reduce, hopefully, bias and discrimination in this country.
You have to start from there. It will be. I sort of walked that journey myself. I was born and raised and grew up in China, very communist China back then, very homogeneous. Everybody looked like me, behaved like me, and so coming over here, I never knew how to deal with. All of a sudden, life is more colorful, and just because you came from a homogeneous country doesn't mean that you are completely color-free or color-blind, right? These kind of stereotypical concepts there. And in fact, we carry our own prejudice, and that's manifested by itself along the way. But you learn. I look back, I know the mistakes. I know that I said things or did things in the today me wouldn't be approving of that. But back then I didn't know. So
what a journey, and a journey from a collectivist culture where you're for the society, and then it must have been pretty brutal to come to this country where we're so individualistic. Which leads me to your journey. So you come to this country, and we'll have to skip over a lot of years, but you see the anti-Asian hate growing, and the Asian flu is just so nasty and mean and cruel, especially for children being teased and bullied, and the cyberbullying that we've heard about for this. So then what led you to create, and I know other people helped you, but to decide we need in Princeton to have an anti-Asian hate rally? Where did all that come from and come together?
Yeah, I think, I've always been someone with a strong sense of justice. And obviously, as the frustration grew bigger and bigger with COVID under, the former administration, it was Asian Americans really felt more and more so we're being put under the spotlight in a negative light. And finally, with the killing that happened in Georgia, where 6 Asian women out of 8 people were killed, and
but other Asian people have been killed in this country.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that one was the sort of the highlight of the thing, and especially was deemed not as a hate crime when it was obvious to us as a community that we were targeted. As an Asian woman, I felt targeted. It just happened to be a different
You felt that
hobby.
Personally?
Yep. By many.
Fear and
absolutely.
trauma?
Yep. It's really what happened. What if I were that person who happened to be there, right? So. I think that kind of fear was so strong and so to the core, it sent a chill down our spines. And then you begin to modify your lifestyle. You think, like I said, you step out of the door, you got to think about, is this safe for me to go into the city? My daughter was talking, my oldest was talking about, buying certain self-defense tools and whatnot, pepper sprays and whatnot, things that we took for granted, and now all of a sudden that physical harm is so present.
And when you say this, I think and I've said this to my husband many times, I don't recognize my country. Why do you have to go through this?
Right.
And your children.
Right. But the real issue is that this has always been there. It's just that they, this kind of ideology was given a platform and a megaphone. So it got amplified. They got this energy that they shouldn't have got because they were encouraged by the Trump administration. So I think that was really, it was years of accumulation.
It was dormant, it was there,
Yep.
and then raised up.
Right, exactly. COVID sort of let it erupt, right? Fanned by China flu, Wuhan virus, and Kung flu, and all of China virus, all of these derogatory terms.
Right.
And so you have these things. Your immediate thought is, let's, a couple of friends reached out and said, we just want to have a small vigil at Tiger Park. Can we do that? And I said, absolutely. So we started organizing it. Within a day or two, it clearly was no longer a small vigil. It was growing, and it got growing bigger. And then we ended up revising the police report. We have to file permit report a couple of times, from 200 people to 500 people, and then we were asking the police department to block the road. They were like, oh, we don't block roads for anything. And then within a couple of hours, they were sending out messages to block the road because we're hearing so many people.
And how many people came?
In the end, I think it was 3,000 something people came.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, that tells you, right, we strike a chord.
So inspiring, and I'm sorry I couldn't make it. I had a conflict that day, but I did see it growing and such. And non-Asian people came to support?
It's people of all colors, black, white, Asian people, you name it. And that tells you something, right? Number one, I was encouraged by the sense of justice that these people brought.
Wonderful.
And that was so invigorating.
And great for kids to see.
Absolutely. And I should have mentioned, really, on the organizing committee, the driving force were the kids, were mostly the high school kids.
That's exciting.
Yep, we had the adults sort of were backseat drivers. We were listening, we were learning. We were sort of guiding them, but they didn't really need much guidance. They were our guidance, and that's what always, that's
How
what.
exciting!
Yeah,
Boy, you must have slept good that night.
Yes, I did.
mean, the mushroom of something good and making a statement.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I hope one of the things, that effort will continue. One of the things is the obvious need to build coalitions, right? You and I have talked about this.
Yes.
This is not just an Asian's job or Jews' job or white people's job or black people's job. I think the black community has a very different kind of history, and their pain is so much more and so much deeper.
Right.
And the rest of the other marginalized groups have a very different path and different history, but still that coalition is what's the most necessary for us to all get together and stay united against racism.
Wonderful. So this is two-pronged, instilling more empathy in our children, and we could talk about that for an hour, and more activism. Does anything come to mind and another word is empathic action, and you're an educator, how can we, and we talked about starting young, how can we better instill activism? Maybe elementary school, middle school, an elementary school kid does a coat drive, a middle school child creates a vigil. How do we, because I have read a lot in research that some kids feel they can't make a difference or they can't be a hero. But at Kidsbridge, we talk to the children about their strengths. So you can contribute to the group, you can contribute to this. Not every kid is a leader or courageous, but every child can make a contribution. So how can we better create youth activists against AAPI hate or any bias?
Right. I think you are the person who answered that question, Lynn. You are the one who wrote the book. And it's so helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, but from my perspective, for younger kids, is about confidence building, number one, and then it's about recognizing other people's strengths. So that's how, you mentioned this, it's really how we together strengthen the community. If I'm only confident by myself and putting everybody else down, that's a toxic environment. We will never go anywhere. But if I've learned to recognize other people's differences and their strength, and I can learn something, and through that collaboration, that peer learning, that's how you bring a community of small human beings together. I call elementary kids small human beings, right?
Yes.
So that's how I see it.
Right.
At the middle school and the high school, I think we want to listen to the kids. We want to trust the kids more.
Right, listening again.
Yes.
Very good.
Yeah, and that's when, teenagers, I've got teenagers home, trust me, there are plenty of eye rolling, right? Doesn't matter where they are, but that's the way they are.
Yeah.
But they are also trying to figure out their role in this world. They're trying to figure out the conflicts in this world. So listen to them and guide them and see how they can solve their own problems. What impact do they see for themselves in this society?
Yeah.
If we don't do that, they become very closed up, and because they're only worried about their grades.
Right, listening for sure, and we need to do a better job of belonging. I do want to put a pitch in for literature, which of course is a great empathy builder, and I think can inspire kids to walk in other shoes, and then empathic action. At Kidsbridge, we call this being an upstander, stand up and speak out. And so if you can't do it alone, you can find a friend, a cousin, a relative. The high schoolers were very active with your rally, but everybody can play a part and do a small piece. But I think we need to get that message out younger to kids. Again, building on the strengths, all the things we talked about, active listening, that we need to create more confident and younger activists to get rid of this bias and discrimination, this toxic.
Yep, absolutely. As an educator, I have to say one of the key things that I pay attention to is culturally relevant teaching. Culturally responsive teaching,
yes.
right? We have to, as adults, we have to role model how to listen, how to respect differences, role model how to accept we didn't do this right. Let's redo this. Can we do it better?
The kids are watching us.
The kids are
carefully.
Watching, right? And then how are you listening to the kids? How do you invite counter narratives? That's a big part of it.
Right.
We can't assume. As an Asian American educator, I can't assume that I know the experiences of my Hispanic kids or Black kids.
Right. But if it's the truth, we need to listen.
Right.
So I want to thank you for coming today. We could talk for another hour, I'm sure, but we do both care about our society and youth and educating, and again, through this lens of empathy, encouraging more activists. I'm hoping we can work together to make the world a better place for everybody.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time today.
And thank you again for the book. It's really an incredible. I hope lots and lots of people will get a copy of your book.
I hope so too. I wrote from my heart.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for coming today. Thank you for joining me and my guests for the inaugural show of Empathy in Action, using a lens of empathy to then inspire youth and adults to take action and make the world a better place, reducing bias, prejudice, and discrimination. So happy that you tuned in today, and have a great day. Bye-bye.